Hey everybody, good afternoon. Are you feeling more of the yay or more meh? And this one, yay! Awesome. So I assume that everybody at this point in time is pretty familiar with lightning talks. This is our last lightning talk session of DevCon. This is actually our last full session of DevCon in general. So lightning talks, if you haven't heard of them before, essentially the slides auto advance. It's an Ignite style. So it's really fast, really catchy. You learn a lot of things in a really short period of time. So I'm not going to take actually any more time because it's all going to go really fast. So here we go.
Hello everyone and welcome to my second lightning talk and unfortunately the last lightning talk block for this event. I am Dennis Koch, a member of the Alfresco expert support team, and today I'm going to give you some useful information around the Alfresco Process Services REST API. My motivation to give this talk was to provide you with answers to questions we had the last few years in support. For example, which REST APIs do actually exist in APS? Why is the API so important? And who can access the REST API? Where do I find an overview of all available API calls? How do I use the API Explorer? And is it possible to extend the API? The first API I want to talk about is the so-called Activity Engine REST API. This is part of the Activity Engine used in APS. This API can be used if you are planning to do migrations from community to our APS offering. It is worth to mention that due to a different or more complex security concept in APS, it is likely that not all calls in this API will work with APS. The second API I am talking about is the so-called internal REST API, which is mainly used for UI functions in Activity App. Those calls are running in the context of Activity App REST. The calls are using additional cookies like CSRF or Activity Remember Me. In support, we do not really recommend using those calls as they are undocumented and were thought to be used internally only. But if the need exists, you could trace those calls with your browser's network console. The most important API then is the public REST API, which is the recommended API to use when integrating APS with external third-party systems. Those calls are running in the context Activity App API Enterprise. So why is this API so important? Well, as said, this is the API to be used when integrating APS with external systems. And then there are some functionalities that can only be reached in APS using that API. And third, and probably most important, that API is also used by our application development framework that can be used to build applications on top of APS and ACS. So I hope you joined as many ADF sessions as possible the last 2 days. Who can actually access the REST API? Access to the REST API is controlled by so-called capabilities. An administrator can add users or groups from the Activity App UI to access the REST API capability. Additionally, the REST API is enforcing the APS permission model. This means that a calling user can only access data he or she is allowed to access and would see an access denied error if that's not the case. To get an overview of all available calls in that API, you can use the API Explorer, which comes as part of the Activity App deployment. The API Explorer is based on Swagger resources and is grouping the available calls logically. Per call, we list optional and required parameters, response codes, sample responses, and the response content type. To actually use API Explorer, you would have to call the URL from the previous slide, and you have to make sure to use valid credentials. You then have to identify the logical area you are interested in and select that area. By clicking on that area, the list of all related APIs will expand and it will show you which TP method is used per call, what's the URL for the call, and it will give you a short description for that call. By selecting a specific call, further details will be displayed, and you will have a try it out button that will actually execute that call against your local APS deployment. So please be careful when doing this against a production environment. Is it possible to extend the REST API? Well, yes, the internal API and the public API both can be extended by developing against our default activity app REST artifact. To extend the internal REST API, you just have to add a bean to the COM activity extension REST package. You have to make sure to have a request mapping defined, a request controller, a REST controller, and to have the endpoint for that API defined. To extend the public API, the same counts, but the endpoint has to start under the /enterprise context. In order to use the new endpoints, you just have to build an extension library and have to place it under activity app, web and flip, and you have to restart the deployment. For further information how to build extensions for APS, I recommend reviewing my slides for the lightning talk about the APS extension project yesterday. Thank you.
Hello, guys. I didn't know at the beginning that was in the big room, this kind of lightning talk. Otherwise, I don't know if I chose it. Anyway, yeah, my lightning talk will be about how to extend the viewer. How many of you use ADF in at least one project? One? Okay, 2, 3, 4. Okay, not too much at the moment, but yeah, it will grow. So this one, for the people that will use these slides later, will be to use documentation to understand this topic that I'm talking about, that is about the extension of the viewer. And there will be even a live demo that is with a planker, that is a useful resource that you can use online in order to, just do some little proof of concept when you're fancy to use ADF for some other framework. So this one is our standard viewer, and it is already support some extension. These extension could be audio format, images, text, and it is smart enough that one of your extension is not supported by the viewer. It uses our rendition service in order to convert it in PDF, and it will show it inside the viewer your file. For example, that could be the case of, I don't know, a PowerPoint. So, but if in this case you are, if you're in the case where you want to show something else that is not supported and you don't want converted it in a PDF, and you have, I don't know, your script that allow you to show this kind of format, this kind of MIME type, you can add a viewer extension. So a viewer extension is easy to add inside the viewer. So the first tag is the ADF viewer, the one that you usually use always, that get an input a node ID. And you can see, you can add this other tag inside, this ADF viewer extension. And you can say, I want this extension support TXT, XML, TypeScript, Java, JavaScript, HTML. And when you say this thing to the viewer extension, it will, instead to use the normal viewer in order to render those kind of extension files, it will use your render. So inside the ngn template, these other two tags, you have to add your code. So that one is an extension that was created by Dennis that embedded inside the Monarcho viewer, that is the base of the Visual Studio Code. And when you say this thing, in practically, you will have inside your viewer this kind of format showed inside using your kind of rendered. So you're in this moment, you are saying to the viewer, don't use your base knowledge as rendering, but use the rendering that I'm saying you to use. And this app code previewer is still a node modus that you can install inside your project. And yeah, I will show you the results in the next slide. Is that one? So as you can see, this one is still the viewer, because it still have the back button and the name of the files with the MIME type recognition and the download button that is there. You can even add other fancy things as a sidebar or other menu, and that one are just other simple tags that you can add inside your project. The cool thing is of this thing that when you add the Monarch viewer inside the ADF viewer, it allows you to use a lot of fancy functionality that usually are the functionality that we use as programmer, as a developer inside VS Code. So if you do, I don't know, the left click inside one of the import, it will send you in this import. It will show you the piece of the code of this import, and there is even the change of the color for the different kind of part of the code. So you will have all the functionality that has Visual Studio, and that one is just with a couple of tags. For example, there are other scenarios. This one was made by me instead. It was I like sometimes do some video game programming, and I had the necessity to use my 3D files using ADF. So at a certain point, there was this necessity for me to view these files. I won't even preview it. And so I created my personal extension that is 3D viewers there. It's still an external node modus. And it allows you to show even the 3D files inside the ADF viewer. So all these two components that I showed there are free, are in GitHub. You can download it. You can understand the code. That is really simple. Most of the time, it's just a wrapper around really notice library as Monarco. In this case, it's 3GS. And you can create you can see how we did this wrapper. That's really easy. And you can create your own render. That could be, I don't know, whatever is possible to use free online.
Hello, my name is Doug Johnson. I'm a member of the product management team, and I directly oversee Alfresco process services and work closely with the activity team, as well as many other members of the team there. What I want to do today is just walk through a couple tips on kind of deploying the parts of the digital business platform all across the board, and specifically want to talk about ADF and kind of follow up with some of the things we've seen today, but also get very practical about it, talk about things like authentication, and also talk about some of the common patterns that I've seen customers talk about. The first thing, of course, we all know that ADF is about creating engaging experiences in terms of what you want to do for your customer solution. However, there are use cases where there are pre-built components and solutions that you can take advantage of. One is an Alfresco Process Services and the Process Workspace. This is going to be available in Alfresco Process Services 1.8, which will be released at the end of this month. In addition to that, we have the Content app, which I think many have had a chance to look at, that also provides some of the best practices and really good guidance around a fully blown application that can be done. And of course, both these items are available. Of course, the Content app is available on GitHub right now. And the Process Workspace will be available in Alfresco Processes 1.8, and the source code is available to customers and Alfresco partners. Now, once you have an application, you need to deploy it. And for that, you have a lot of flexibility in how you can approach that. You can deploy those applications in ADF on Nginx or Apache. You can host them in a WAR file yourself, or you can run them in a Spring Boot app. Now, there are a number of, once you have kind of those UX patterns, you have to look at authentication. And there are a number of approaches here at Alfresco on using those technologies. The one that works very well today across the entire stack is Kerberos. And so with Kerberos, it is the most practical way to bring together a full application across content, process, and governance. And they, of course, work with the sample applications that are available, including the two that were mentioned earlier. Now, with that authentication comes this idea that as you have users that you want to sync, there is the ability to use that, and that is the LDAP sync that's available. And also you can have some interactions using, for instance, the share connector, which is part of APS, to ensure that interaction between those system actions that you might perform from a process updating content actions. Now, speaking of content and process actions, let's look at some of the use cases that you might be deploying in and some of the things that you can take advantage of as part of a total solution, if you will. Most likely, many of the solutions you're using are case-oriented when you're talking about the entire platform. And with that, one of the patterns that's very commonly deployed is using triggers to start off processes. And this is an example where we're using some of the lower code tooling that's in Alfresco process services to kick off. But in addition to that, as you look at governance, there's, of course, records management and strong governance there. But also, did you know that as you audit a business process, you can create a document and then store that in the repository and have it fit right alongside your records management? And in addition to that, you can also orchestrate metadata from within Alfresco process services and orchestrate updates to the metadata that is in content services. This can include the ability to use things like AWS. Some of the things that John Newton was talking about this morning are things that customers are doing today, orchestrating those flows, interacting, getting the data, and fitting it into automated records classification. And here's an example that we can see where we're making the way that we're dealing with records management smarter by using artificial intelligence and the process services working together with content and governance capabilities. Now, as I wrap up here, I did want to say that all these capabilities are available today, and we have customers, partners, and many community members here that are doing these sort of things, but we know there's additional areas, and so I want to spend 45 seconds on the roadmap. One thing is we do recognize, as was Brian Remington had mentioned earlier, we want to modernize that authentication. We have a great plan around that to add additional protocols. Now, in addition to that, we do have some additional things that I wanted to highlight. We know that we have great capability across process, content, and governance. We want to look at additional improvements around permission control. You saw some of the roadmap around search. Very exciting stuff in the future that will make it easier to deal one place for common services. And lastly, some of those case management use cases that we saw, we already do that great today. We've identified several areas that we want to improve, including some additional metaphors and other ways that we can simplify the creation of those kind of solutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, hi, my name is Jeff Potts, and I'm doing my first lightning talk ever on a new add-on for managing ACL templates. So I have something shocking to tell you guys. Alfresco is missing a feature. I know, everyone's like, what? Yeah, it's called ACL templates. Now, many projects start out with a standardized folder structure, and then with that standardized folder structure, we have a standardized set of permissions. Usually those permissions get applied in a consistent way according to business rules. Makes sense. Now, a lot of times we're programmatically setting permissions on nodes. And of course, you want to centralize that logic into a common service class so that if you had to change it, you know, it's all centralized in one place. That makes sense. But what happens when something changes? So a business rule changes or a user wants to change how those permissions are being set. Do you really want to do a build and deploy just to change how your application needs to change something from collaborator to consumer? You know, that's kind of lame. Well, how do other systems do this? Well, many ECM systems allow permission sets to be declared separately and then applied when needed. And now you can do that with Alfresco. So I give you a new open source add-on called Alfresco ACL templates. All right, suppose you have some folders that are related to client projects. We have project teams, we have client teams. So for some folders, or for all folders, the project team has collaborator access, while the client team has collaborator access sometimes and consumer access at other times. So that's potentially 2 templates that could be applied to these folders. So we've kind of detected a pattern here, which is great. The problem is that there's variability in this pattern. So we don't know at development time what our project teams are going to be or what our client teams are going to be. So anytime we talk about an ACL template, that ACL template system has got to be able to deal with this kind of variability. There's another wrinkle. The other wrinkle is time. So this is another example of variability where your ACLs look one way when your projects are, let's say, active, and they look another way when your projects are completed. So this is just an additional set of templates, but it's just another example of variability that you have to deal with. ACL templates is a new add-on, and it allows you to declare your ACLs as JSON. You put that JSON in the data dictionary, and then you call the ACL template service when you want to apply those ACL templates to an actual node. Here's an example of a static ACL template. It defines two permissions, and it's hard-coded the authorities here, where we have a group project that we're setting that group to collaborator, and a client group, and we're setting that group also to collaborator. Now that we have that defined, we want to apply that template to a node. We just, in Java, for example, import the template service, inject the template service with Spring, and then call the apply method. In this case, we're applying the test template to ACL template to a node ref called test folder. Now, to deal with variability, instead of hard-coding the authorities, we can use authority templates. So in this case, I've replaced the hard-coded groups with 2 authority templates. One's called project team, and the other one's called client team. How does that work? Well, you can take an authority template, and that's just a Spring bean that takes a node ref and then does whatever logic you need to decide what the actual authority is that you want to apply to that ACL. So what is the project group for this site? The resolver figures it out. Right now, we ship with one sample authority template resolver. All it does is it figures out what the group is that's assigned to a site for a given level of permission. So you can implement your own authority resolvers really easily. You just implement a class, or implement an interface, I should say, that's authority resolver, inject your dependencies, implement the resolve method, wire it up in Spring, and then add that bean to the authority resolvers map. Here's an example. This is an authority template called Site Manager Group. All it does is it looks to see what group is assigned site manager access to a particular site, and then returns that. Then that group can be used in your ACL. Here's what the resolve method looks like. It's very simple. It's given the node ref, that's part of the interface, then it uses the site service, and then it gets the site role group for whatever role was specified. So again, this is just an example, but this is actually pretty handy. So to summarize, ACL templates is an add-on, allows you to declare your permissions in JSON stored in the data dictionary, apply that with a template service. That removes your permission logic from code, making it easier for non-technical people to make permission changes without having to redeploy your app. ACL templates can have hard-coded authorities, authority templates, or a mixture of both, whatever you need. Authority templates are resolved with authority template resolver classes. We ship with one, but you can implement your own. This add-on happened to be funded by one of my clients who asked me to make this add-on as well as their entire set of customization and configuration open. So if you want to see what a typical small project for Alfresco looks like, you can check it out at GitHub. And if you have any questions, let me know.
Well, I'm Richard. I'm a product manager for Alfresco. I like to talk about open source. I like to read about history. For something completely different, let's talk about lessons that the French Revolution can teach us about open source software. So there is a warning here. I'm an uncultured American speaking about history to a bunch of Europeans. I have really bad French pronunciation, and we're going to draw a number of overly simplified historical analogies. So exit now if you need to, but I'm going to proceed. In the late 18th century, the French monarchy was known as the ancient regime, and they had a reputation for greed, for excess, for a complete disregard of the welfare of the lives of the common people, generally hubris all around, which reminds me of the situation we have today with enterprise software. where these enterprise companies use their proprietary business models and control they have over their software to extract maximum value from their users, when their clients, with little regard for the damage it does to the overall ecosystem or to democracy, with predictable results. People band together and throw off the chains of their overlords. They collaborate to build open tools that will allow them to determine their own destiny independent in a democratic process. Similar things happened in Paris in the late 1700s, when the fishmongers were frustrated about the exorbitant price of bread, took their fish pikes, marched to Versailles, and stormed the palace, taking the king prisoner. These ladies were not to be messed with. Similar things happened as the populace overthrew the Bastille, stormed the guard, took the arms for themselves, and it really culminated in August when they stormed the palace and killed the king's guard and put the king in prison. However, the most lasting part of this revolution was the philosophical perspective it bestowed on all democracies. The Declaration of the Human Rights of Man has become the foundation of every government since that point in time. Similarly, in free and open source software, it provides this philosophical foundation of 4 essential freedoms which create a relationship between the user and the ecosystem, which allows collaboration and the sort of freedoms we look for in a democratic environment. However, there's a lot of ways to interpret these philosophies. And in Paris, the Estates General immediately broke into fractious fighting over what was the right way to proceed to implement this philosophy. The moderates, led by American Revolutionary War hero Lafayette, were looking for a constitutional monarchy. They wanted to provide stability through the transition to a popular government. On the extreme were the revolutionaries, led by Robespierre and Marat, that were looking for immediate social transformation at whatever cost. And Marat was a firebrand who would label anyone who disagreed with him as a traitor to the people and call for their death. Now, what was Lafayette looking for from a this does remind me of something more modern, as certain members of the free and open source software community try to make immediate transformation without paying attention to the cultural context, the business context, and the legal environment in which we operate. Now, Lafayette was looking for certain value from a constitutional monarchy, aside from a tourist attraction, that the aristocracy could provide expertise and resources that would provide stability, and also give people a common flag to rally around, to provide stability and unity during the transformation. Now, enterprise open source provides similar benefits to open source software. It provides a consistent vision, a place where people can collaborate and rally around, but it also provides resources, which allows a competitive strategy. But we have to attract investors, the businesses, to this ecosystem. As an open source business, we can promise a speed of execution, word of mouth marketing, lots of innovation experimentation, and intense loyalty. But investors also look at proprietary businesses where they can get predictable returns by leveraging competitive differentiators and to create defensible businesses. And they can get returns on a scale that's hard to do in an open source business. So we have to look at how we provide that. Now, Lafayette, by defending the rights of the king against the mob, was branded a betrayer of the people and had to flee France. He was immediately arrested by a neighboring monarchy for being a revolutionary who wanted to overthrow the monarchy. In the time he spent in prison, France was vulnerable to internal civil war and external threats. It got so bad that an ambitious young general decided to march to Paris, throw a military coup, and declare himself Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte. Lafayette, on the other hand, was true to his principles and even though Napoleon freed him from prison, Lafayette refused to recognize any government that was not democratically elected and did not represent the people. The moral of the story is, as a product manager at Alfresco, I need to look at how we can be true to our open source roots and still attract investors and capital into our business, because this allows us to compete against proprietary competitors and rally around as a common community. Thank you.